This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicoladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón!
It's gone! It's gone! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
We want to win. It's Seattle Sounders, bro.
Porter says cheated.
You know, what was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder Carr wrote a commentary that we didn't take Open Cup seriously.
Welcome back to another episode of Nos Arietes. I'm Jeremiah O'Shan. Joining me today is the incomparable Max Bretos of Apple TV fame and everything else. How are you doing, Max?
Yeah, great, Jeremiah. I'm a bad smell when it comes to soccer. I've been around forever. It's just
I know
wafting around, and people like some people it's like a creature comfort, and some people it's like maybe nails on the chalkboard. But I'm here, baby.
Well,
And,
you were like the thing I always remember. I always appreciated. You were like one of the only people on ESPN back in the day that was like giving soccer like some real love.
right. Well, I was at Fox Soccer Channel. This was the dark ages of the coverage of the sport here. There was I think when I started, 1996, oh boy, it just keeps further and further away. There was like, you'd have a Monday night Premier League game on ESPN, and then there was some Champions League games, and then mostly you'd have like Liga MX. That was the only thing you would get other than the big tournaments, the World Cup only.
Mm-hmm.
The Euros wasn't even televised. None of that was. So we were on this all soccer channel, and I kind of got that, and was that eventually allowed the move to ESPN. But I always wanted to be in soccer, but you also wanted to always have that opportunity to work at ESPN and Sports Center, which you did. But as the time went in, I'm already answering a question before you even asked one, Jeremiah. This is, but as I did, I wanted, obviously soccer was. I was all in at that point. I was like, I want to be immersed in this sport. So full circle now. Here I am talking to you.
I know it's great. It's great. I've always appreciated that about you. I've really honestly come to appreciate intensely the work that you guys do on the broadcast. You and Dunny are probably the most entertaining group team out there. I don't know if that's who you're paired with this week, but
yes,
I do really enjoy you and Dunny. I've come to really appreciate it.
Well, and let me ask you this, because the way I do it, we talk about the broadcast, and I feel doing MLS, which isn't the Premier League, it's not the Champions League where everyone knows who these people are and they have a 200-year history, is that I think we sometimes have to be a little more entertaining, a few more bells and whistles, to be a little more engaged, because we don't have, obviously the star power. One day we will play. We have great players, but we don't, every team is just loaded, and we don't have that history. So, I'm curious, how you would like a good, MLS
I'll tell you,
because when people say we can't, I guess the answer to my point was to compare it to the Premier League. It's just to me, it's got to be a much different presentation.
I think there's room for it to be a different presentation. There are times, especially early on when you and Dunny were working together, I thought sometimes it veered a little bit into a little bitty. You know what I mean? A little, like there could be a little over. But I think you guys have really found a good balance. I don't know if those are notes that you ever received or not, but there is a authenticity to the banter that I appreciate. and it seems like you guys play off one another really well.
That's great to hear. And Jeremiah, just interactions with the MLS, our MLS world, which I think you have to be honest, talking to the journalists, talking to the players, the coaches, and just trying to paint that and not be phony. And I've been doing this forever, and there's moments where this season where I've said things like, oh, that felt a little insincere or what have you. And then, we're just always learning still. And doing this in this format with MLS, we've done it for 2 years. So I've kind of come in with a new perspective and still fine tuning it. But it's, I think being, true to the league and the people involved has been a good guideline, a good guideline.
Well, I'll say that I think the moment where I was finally embraced it all was when you dubbed Dylan Tevez' hair immaculate lettuce.
It's got good hair. Sounders in general have good hair.
They do. And that's sort of a thing that's gone back a ways. I think that might be on their scouting checklist is good hair, because they do seem to bring in a pretty steady stream of coiffed.
Yes. Rothrock's got a good salad. De La Vega's got a nice one too. Jordan Mar's a little bit, and the Roldanbro's a little bit more kept, but still nice flow.
Yeah, there's not a lot of disasters at the very least.
Yeah. Who is the backup keeper? Why am I?
Andrew Thomas.
Andrew Thomas.
Oh yeah, he's great mane.
Great mane. He has this big chiseled. I walk by him and it's this big chiseled jawline, and it's like just an impressive human being to see up close if you get that chance in Seattle.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Well, you aren't on the Sounders game this week, but you do a lot of work with LAFC, which is the main reason I wanted to talk to you. Was you seem to know LAFC really as well as anyone. What's the sense of the sort of the rivalry with the Sounders, or is I know Sounders fans now, there is like an honest debate within Sounders fandom about if LAFC is now the big rival of the Sounders, even in a different way than the Timbers, but it's become such a bugaboo team for the Sounders. Does LAFC feel that at all?
I think they do. I haven't heard it said publicly, but being associated with LAFC from the beginning, when they started, obviously they had the rivalry with the Galaxy, which was going to be all in from the jump, and we saw that from the first chapter. Then there was a season or two where the Timbers became like that second rival. They had some big games, and even till today, it always felt like Timbers are number two. But then, being a young club, things adjust. And even the Whitecaps, which LAFC have played 12 times the last 2 years. There's just
really is that the actual number?
That's the actual number, because they had the playoffs the last 2 years, CONCACAF Champions Cup last year.
Oh yeah.
So that's 6 games right there. Mm-hmm. And then Leagues Cup, it's unbelievable. So, but those two, neither of those two teams want to see each other again. So that's fatigue. The Sounders kind of crept up on it because in those early years, from the LAFC perspective, 18, 19, they didn't really have any notable matchups, really ones that you remember off the top of your head. But that's obviously changed in 2019 in that playoff game, which put all the chips into the Sounders. And that was a very difficult pill to swallow. Their magical season. And I was there, and I'll always remember Bob Bradley and Brian Schmetzer. And Bob Bradley was just mulling it over. And I've spoken to Bob after that, and he says he relives that game over and over and over again. It's like a sickness. That's my word, not his. It's just, it really affects him. And I remember Brian Schmetzer coming up to him and going, "Hey, sorry, bud."
Right, yeah.
He's like, "Hey, man, I'm sorry about that." He was apologizing for beating him. I'm sure he was just being Brian, the gentleman all the time. But that changed it. And I should say that was the second year, but they didn't play that much. So every time that they'd get a chance, and now we have this run in the postseason, and they've kind of been unavoidable.
Yeah, so it's the fourth consecutive knockout tournament that they've faced each other, going back to last year's playoffs. Yeah, so they play, obviously they played in the playoffs last year. Maybe it doesn't feel the same for the LAFC because they've moved on
Yes.
past those games. But the Sounders, last year's playoffs, Leagues Cup, Open Cup, and now this, it's a very clear obstacle that the Sounders have to clear for them to achieve what they aspire to, which is winning trophies. And LAFC has been the absolute team that they have been running face first into each time. And it's, you go back and I think it's 10 straight since the Sounders beat LAFC. And within that time, I think they only even have 3 ties, maybe 2 ties. It's been an all LAFC rivalry. And I think there was a lot of sense going into the Open Cup where it's at Starfire. It felt like all the advantages were on the Sounders side. And yet it's LAFC who comes up with a penalty kick and then gets a favorable offside call, which I think was correct, but an offside call there at the end. And here we are. LAFC moves on again. They win the Open Cup. But it's been an interesting season for LAFC where it does seem like it's gone through some real roller coaster aspects. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yeah, and by the way, that's stunning, that history. And that's what makes it such a compelling matchup, because I don't know, I'll talk about the LAFC season, but just the approach for LAFC, it's hard to beat. I'm not taking a jab at them, but kind of, it's hard to beat the San Jose Earthquakes 5 times in a season.
I agree.
Let alone the Sounders.
I agree.
Who look just, the immovable object. They just can't, no one's getting through these guys. And the way they just bullied the Dynamo, and we saw the worst of Houston come to the surface because it was the Sounders. It was really impressive. And for that to be in a situation for this team, and I can't even imagine, and maybe it's a disadvantage that they would be so fired up saying, we can't lose to this team 5 times this season. And maybe that will affect them. But I think LAFC is also thinking, how can we beat this team 5 times? I think we spoke to Steve Cherundolo, and he wouldn't really address that. He just, not to be cliche about a game per game. And I think he'll feel confident about his team's chances because it's been a good matchup, and maybe use that to his benefit. But to answer your question, Steve Cherundolo doesn't get the recognition that he certainly deserves, because this was a very good season. They had that bad patch. They're always incorporating new players, especially these last 3 years when he's there. That's difficult, and we've seen it derail a lot of teams. I mean, the Sounders don't have to worry about it. They've had the same group, and incredibly, they've stayed injury-free.
More, I think.
Yeah, well, I was talking about the Sounders in the middle of the season. I go, they're not. This is not sustainable.
Doesn't feel
they need to spend some money and get it, but I was wrong somehow.
Well, I think that's you're right. It's an interesting, not to cut you off, but it is an interesting debate, because it feels like, I agree, that they have to start spending some money and refreshing this roster, because you feel like you just can't keep rolling out the same roster game after game. And yet they went on a nearly historic run in the second half of the season. If they had won that game against Portland in the season finale, they would have had the second most points in a half season in MLS history.
Wow.
Which is crazy. I mean, that's a crazy stat.
Unbelievable. Because there was a point in the season, I remember I called a game and I was there, and I saw Adrian Hanauer. I go, "Hey, Adrian, what's going on?" And he was like, he's always very cordial. And he's like, "I can't right now." And it was like, and I saw Brian roll in, and then Craig Weibel, and they were like, held their heads down. And I imagine, I don't know, because I wasn't in the room.
No, it was I mean, they were 1-5-3 to start the season.
Yes.
It was very bad. There were real conversations about whether or not Brian was going to stick around or not.
There's no way that Brian and Craig probably didn't say, "Hey, we need help. We need to get this or this." Right. Whatever that looks like. And then whatever happened, they leaned into what they had, this amazing setup, academy setup, and MLS Next Pro team, the Defiance, and they found what they were needing. The more I talk about it, Jeremiah, it's one of the great sports stories, because they shouldn't be here. This should have been, like, to me, the exposing the Sounders for not buying and spending money, and they're getting a reprieve because they've made it work. I just don't know how they did it. I don't know how they did it.
Yeah, I don't either. And you bring up a good point about the academy and the Defiance, and that is one thing that I really think that you and Dunny have done a better job of than maybe anyone else I've heard calling the games, is sort of highlighting the work that the Sounders have done to develop talent within their own market. And that is that it's, we hear about Philadelphia and we hear about Dallas because they're selling players on, and the Sounders have not made the same kind of big sales, but they've done as good of a job as anyone of filling out their roster with players that come through their developmental system. I think over half their minutes, half their goals, I think half their assists have all come from players who came through their academy. And this is not LA where we have the most talent rich area, but there's, obviously there's good players here, but it has been a great story. And I appreciate that you guys have pointed this out on multiple occasions.
I think it's important, but it shouldn't be that way. Even these clubs worldwide that have great academies, whether it be, West Ham back in the day, and there's some of these French academies, I want to say, is it Stade Rennais? They're always unearthing talent. But they still need to find, they fill the gaps somewhere else. And Seattle does that. But, you look, Pedro de la Vega has been the signing in 2 seasons, or like the last 12 months, I should say. That's been kind of it. Where people are
adding 3 years, that's their biggest signing.
That is. So, and like to your point, to me, it's like a story that needs to be told. And I've told that to the Apple folks, because even in LA, where there's more talent, the Galaxy, who've been in it a long time, and LAFC have now been developing players. Neither of them have come close to what the Sounders have done just in the last 5 or 6 years. Just look at that group of players that is right now aiding the Sounders in what they're trying to achieve. You've got to give credit to the club and the coaching and everything they do, because they're neighbors in Portland. I know it's not as big of a city. They love soccer there. They have a history, yet they can't get 2 good players out of there.
They can't barely get Americans on the field, let alone
they've
Portlanders.
Yeah, and I'm taking jabs at all these things, but Portland's gone a different route because that doesn't work for them. Where Seattle, most of those players are from Washington State. Obviously, you have Obed Vargas and a couple others. And even the Roldan brothers are not like academy, but to find these guys through Washington
college here,
from LA, right. It's really, that doesn't make any sense to me, Jeremiah. It shouldn't be feasible that this is their means to their success, but here we are.
I know. I asked Brian about this sort of yesterday, and he acknowledging that there is a feel good element to this, but ultimately asking if this is like how you judge the success of it. And he was pretty blunt. He's like, well, we got to start winning. If we're going to have this many, we need these guys to deliver championships. Like it's only as useful as we are. If Jordan Morris is scoring in big games, if Jackson Reagan is coming up with big defensive plays, that's what we need. That's what's important. It's not whether or not they came from Seattle, but it's been an interesting subplot to this season for sure. And it's been, it stands in contrast to a lot of what a lot of other teams are doing, but talking about LAFC's mid-season transformation, you bring in Olivier Giroud, they bring in Lewis O'Brien, 2 big acquisitions. How have they fit in so far, would you say?
Lewis O'Brien is, every database he has exceeded, or data point, pardon me. He's on loan. They have to sign him. He's an integral part of this team now. I think he started every game, and that Leagues Cup final, which was his first game, his second game, he came on at the half. Mm-hmm. He was the first sub off the bench. So clearly the coaches, like, this guy is it. This is what we've been looking for, a perfect piece to that formation. He plays every minute of every game. So I would be stunned. And if he's at Nottingham Forest, which means the price tag is not going to be cheap. But they have to sign him. When you look at it, with the other pieces that have developed over the years, obviously Denny Bouanga and Matty Bogusz, who's exploded this season. That was the piece that have allowed them to reach the goals that they've hit, finishing first in the West. Olivier Giroud's the other one. Obviously, we could see, he hasn't scored an MLS goal. He had one in Open Cup and one in Leagues Cup. And he's gripping a bit. It's not the perfect fit for this team, because as a 36, 37-year-old number 9, in a team with this kind of transition. I mean, they're going to have to make it work, and I think they can. He turns, if he's doing some hold-up play, and then Bouanga's like, choo, sprinting out there, and that's very hard to keep up with for the Giroud profile. But he does a lot of the things that, those little things he does well enough. And, this is a winger-based team. I mean, they had Chicho Arango for a bit, but other than that, their best attacking players are midfielders or wingers, the guys who score all the goals. So I think for Giroud, it's just a situation. And he didn't start game 3 against the Whitecaps. I'm sure he'll start against the Sounders. I think it's a better matchup. That if he can get that goal, it would make all the difference. But they're happy with what he's done. Obviously, they would like more goals. He would like more goals. It's just what he's used to. It's got to be a shock to the system. He's like, man, and it's part, he's got to shoulder some of the blame, but it's also it's a result of how this LAFC team is playing. But again, there is a belief that one moment when it hits, it'll hit oil.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes No Sarietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. We've been independent since August of 2023, but need your support to make sure it continues. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible by your continued support. Memberships start as low as $25 a year, which not only helps make podcasts like this one happen, but also gets you access to everything we produce. If you're able to support us at higher levels, starting at $75 a year, you gain access to a host of other perks, most notably entry into our members-only Discord, where the smartest, funniest, and most engaged commenters share their thoughts and ideas. To find out more, just visit sounderatheart.com and click the subscribe button in the top right corner. Thanks for listening.
Are there any other spots on the roster on the starting lineup where you feel like there's question marks, or is it pretty set at this point?
They have a lot of good depth. I mean, the team's changed a lot. Ilie Sanchez and Eduardo Atuesta were starters all season, but they don't start now. I would tend to think he might start here. They kind of disguise if they're short, either when they play the 3 center backs, which I think Steve Tornillo prefers, and then have the 2 wing backs, whether it's Palencia and Hollingshead or Hollingshead and Campos. Palencia always is in there. He's played center back too. So if they play with the 3, I mean, they get rid of their center back depth. They have Jesus Murillo coming back. I think that makes it a complete set, and they could possibly play with 4 if they want to have a 3-man midfield. Horses for courses. The front 3, if it was Bogusz, Giroud and Bouanga, you're thrilled. You have Christian Oliveira that can also come in, so you have a 4th piece in case you need a little pop. And then the midfield, they have 4 good. The depth is good. If there's an upgrade, and there's always a place where you can upgrade. Maybe they could have a little more creativity in the midfield, which with the 2 that they have, Tillman and O'Brien, they're more utilitarian industrial types, and they'll win the ball, they'll get it upfield. Maybe a little more passing that maybe a Carlos Vela would have done in the past. But with the way this team's built, it's hard to find a shortcoming. The one thing would be is they need more. It would be great if they get more goals at the 9 position. But if they're getting goals from other people, you can live with that.
What did you feel like the Whitecaps did well in that series? It felt like they gave LAFC really all they could. I mean, LAFC lost on aggregate, I suppose.
Yeah, it was. I mean, Ryan Gauld is really interesting, and he was healthy, and he was kind of hard to track, and LAFC were losing him a lot. And I thought the way they just threw numbers up exposed LAFC, certainly in the midfield, because certainly in that second leg where they won. I mean, you would see like 7-on-4, 6-on-4, 5-on-3, and it'd always be an extra man for the Whitecaps, and they had real issues handling that. I think a physical nature that Andres Cubas was able to provide and getting under the skin made a big difference. Veselinovic, it was just they were tough, but I thought winning the ball and then just going and not making mistakes to get caught. They didn't give LAFC time to go for that transition. For whatever, there was just too much pressure. And those center backs were pushed way back. And I remember, I mean, there was in the second leg, and there was signs of it in the third leg too, early on, where LAFC just couldn't. They could get out of their end, but they could never really get into a good attacking position. And the Whitecaps, it just felt sometimes in stretches that, it felt like the Whitecaps had an extra player there. I don't know how Vanny did it, but he did it.
Have you been surprised this year at the degree to which LAFC has sort of embraced not having the ball?
Yeah, it's Steve Cherundolo, I think, really enjoys that moment, enjoys that style, and he's built a team that is, this is it's weird because it's a very modern kind of new philosophy about, we're not going to touch the ball. I remember watching the World Cup, and it was, France and Morocco naturally are going to try and sit back and absorb pressure. And then France says, well, we're going to do that too. And then they're like, And then Morocco finds it. The heck with it. They went, France caught them. And I was like, man, we never used to see this from good, more talented teams.
Right.
More talented teams saying we don't need the ball. We'll wait. We will counterpunch, and we will hurt you. So I think they really revel in that, and I think more teams perhaps will go that direction. But it's a badge of honor for them how they can win without touching the ball that much.
Well, I know especially against the Sounders where they've really excelled is if they can get an early goal, they have it. Once they have the lead, they are almost impossible to beat, it seems.
Yes. That's what it came down to the Whitecaps game too. And I think game 3, everyone said whoever scores first is going to win it. And that's what happened. It was one goal. And, the Sounders' defensive record and the LAFC's defensive record, they've both been uncompromising. It feels like this game will feel more like the Starfire game than it did when they played in Leagues Cup, which was one-way traffic. It's maybe we have like some weird 7-goal thriller, but it just feels like it's going to be a chess match out there, which will be very compelling in its own right.
Yeah. Is there any one player that you feel like is particularly worthy of, like, needs more attention in terms of on LAFC that maybe doesn't get talked about quite as much?
I think a lot of them don't get talked about. I think they're the sum of their parts. They don't have a Cucho or a Lucho Acosta or
Mwanga,
a Messi.
I suppose.
But Mwanga, yes. I mean, he's the guy. I mean, so people, they focus on him. And I think Bogusz is getting his due diligence. I say Aaron Long. I'll get laughed at, but I was almost waiting for Mauricio Pochettino to announce his roster, and Aaron Long was going to be on it. I just thought he fits the profile now of an older guy, still super athletic, who can move around that back line. I think he's been excellent. Certainly to me, one of the 3 or 4 best center backs this season. And then Sergi Palencia is just exceptional. I think he leads the league in tackles. So he does a lot of the dirty work. And he's a guy who came with very little fanfare. So it'd be crazy not to mention Lewis O'Brien, because he really did change this team upon his arrival. They needed that in the midfield. That was, you asked what was missing. That's what was missing, and they filled it, and they could do it. But it's the Sounders have their hands full because they're going to have to find a weak spot there, and it's when they're healthy, which LAFC is, it's going to be hard to expose that.
Well, I'm going to go down there on Saturday, and I went to LAFC for the first time for the season opener this year. I was really impressed by the whole deal. I think it's a great place to watch a game. So I'm looking forward to going down there. But we have a couple questions from our readers, our listeners. And I just want to throw them your way.
I just want to say that the league's got to be thrilled, obviously, with this whole thing with Messi getting knocked out, to have this matchup kind of rescue the day. And if you're uninterested because Messi's out, just tune into this history. This is really good.
No, I agree. And that was one of the things I thought was so fun. I made the pitch. I think that I know the league office is, I'm sure, very upset about it. But this is the Western half of the bracket still has a lot of compelling matchups. And
I don't think the league is upset. I think the league knows what's what with MLS. It would be naive to think that Inter Miami and LAFC or Inter Miami and the Galaxy would be your final. Never in a million years they just assume that was going to happen, because it doesn't happen very rarely.
It does not.
Last year it kind of did. 2022 it did, but that's more reason why it could go off the rails in 24. So I think they have the league office. People think that they're like, oh, they're not. They know this. The playoffs are the playoffs for that reason.
Absolutely. Well, okay. So we got a few questions I wanted to ask you from our listeners here. One of our readers, Dan, is asking about your partnership with Dunny and how it feels very genuine. And he's just curious, are these off the cuff conversations, or do you guys actually sort of trade notes about back and forth as to, little references that you guys make?
No, it's pretty much off the cuff. I mean, we talk about it, and I think that's one of the things very fortunate. I've known Brian for a long time. He worked at Fox Soccer. That's where he started his broadcasting. I think I was with him on his first game. So I've known him. He's a good friend. There's a lot of trust there. I mean, most broadcast teams are like that, but I mean, no one has the tenure we're us. So we can take shots at each other. Whatever it is, I mean, we're very thick skinned. I guess that's where the departure is with some broadcast teams. There's some people I wouldn't take that jab or take some liberties with, where I can with Brian. And so that makes it very easy. And anything you bring up, will be absorbed, and if it's a bad point, you'll get called out for it. So we're keeping our tongue. I mean, over the air, we will undress each other, and like I'll say, you said that 2 minutes ago. You didn't listen, whatever it is. So,
are you listening to yourself?
Did you not hear? I said that already. Get off your phone.
Are you on your phone ever? I guess if you're doing play-by-play, you can't be on your phone, but Dunny's got to be on his phone.
No,
right?
I'm on my laptop a lot, and I'm looking for stuff.
Okay.
Information, and then I'll get a whack on the side, which is a courtesy whack. I'm like, whoa! And I need to manage it a little better, because I think good announcers also have a better whole handling of everything. And I'm like, I go to this panic mode. I remember I saw this before. Where was it?
Right.
Type it up. So we kind of look out for each other in that. So we're very fortunate to have each other. And I think the world of him. I'll tell it if he's not here or if he was here as well.
Fair enough. So Aaron, my co-host on the show normally, he wants to know if I guess you make a lot of Eno references. Is that intentional?
The emo? What's it?
Eno. Brian Eno, maybe? I don't know. What Eno? I'm not even sure we do.
Brian Eno? Perhaps. And I was a big fan of, when Roxy Music and when Brian Eno separated, and then he had all these weird albums with like sound effects, which I'd put in. And my wife's like, "What are you listening to?" I go, "Brian Eno." And then there was a couple songs that maybe I subconsciously mentioned some of the lyrics, but that's not out of the realm of possibility. And I've said that on the broadcast. I love going to Seattle because music-wise,
people get your references.
Well, I don't listen to KEXP, but I'm on their YouTube page all the time, and they have those in concerts, because that's the Seattle music scene is. I don't want to generalize, but music that people in Seattle like is kind of like what I like: alt rock, some electronic stuff, all of that kind of, the grunge, all of that. So
I'll give you I'll let you know, you can listen to KXP in LA. It's streamed. They have an app that you can
say that on the. Yeah,
I know. I'm just saying, like, you don't need to. You're probably listening to K-Rock or something like that. That you can like listen to real unprogrammed radio.
I was walking around Pike's Place, and I saw one of the DJs from the KXP videos, and I'm like, ah! And he was like, I forgot his name. He's like, what? I go, oh, I saw you did this thing with so-and-so. It was amazing. He's like, oh, great. He did not expect that.
No, that's I love that. All right, so this is from a guy that goes by the name Sounders Pilot, and he says, if the Sounders bunker and look to counter, giving LAFC possession, do you see LAFC being able to break down a low block? And then who do you think is the bigger problem for LAFC, Georgie Monungu or Pedro de la Vega?
That's a great question. Really well detailed. Maybe that Morocco-France example I gave you. So right. We don't want the ball.
Right.
You take it. I would think that might not be a bad call. I mean, because that might fluster a team that, especially in the postseason, has been very content with very little possession. I think Pedro de la Vega is the right answer. He's been frustrating, I know, for the Sounder fans. And I mean, Monungu's so pure at what he does. He's not. And same with Rothrock. This is what we do. We're going to get vertical. We're going to work hard. I love watching it. But I don't have a right answer for that, because I think I think I could see Manungu changing that game. If De La Vega would start, I think Manungu could be a nice change of pace. I would think that would be the direction they go. But to answer that question, Manungu in that role could be a difference maker.
And what's great about Manungu and Rothrock is they are both these great stories that I would imagine any broadcaster just falls in love with. This,
Yes.
Manungu is blind in one eye, and he's, had this kind of interesting journey to get here. And Rothrock obviously was, a local kid who went to play elsewhere and sort of just found his way back. But anyway,
everyone needed Rothrock. I mean, Manungu, I can't even fathom. When you don't have vision in an eye, you rule out sports.
Right.
99.9%. You can't play sports. You need both eyes. So I don't know how he does it.
Right.
But Rothrock is so interesting because the last 2 years, every MLS team has dropped big coin for big time wingers. Buanga, Peck, Andres Gomez at Real Salt Lake. You're all looking for that guy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Seattle spent $0 to get close to the output. Not there, but not far off.
Not far. I mean, on a per minute basis, he's been very good.
He's like a low earner. I mean, he's making
almost nothing.
Yeah. So I hope that changes. It should change. But that is to go back to the story about the Sounders. That's crazy. I mean, you have to get a big time winger. Austin, the Ghanaian player's name escapes me. They dropped $7-8 million mid-season because they thought that's what they would do. Mm-hmm. Seattle had Rothrock.
Well, and I'll close out with this. Do you have favorite teams to call? I'm sure you enjoy calling LAFC because it's you know them probably the best. But is there anyone else that you really enjoy calling games for?
Seattle's certainly up there. I'll put that. And just getting on calls with Brian, just delight. And he rips people. It's like sometimes we forget to add. Some coaches give you their lineup, some don't. If we forget Seattle, he would literally say, "Hey, do you want the lineup?" I go, "Yeah, yeah, sure, thanks." And I just love the proximity of the stadium. Obviously, in a perfect world, it'd be great if there was a 25,000 seater there in Seattle downtown where people go. But this is still pretty good. Portland, part of it is from my travel. Growing up in Miami, I didn't know about Alaska Airlines, but I always get upgraded on Alaska Airlines. So I'm there in the first class. I always sit on the right on a day so I can see Mount St. Helens and Mount Rainier, and I get really pumped. So I go. And then when they curl around Seattle, I mean, it's just that flight in is the best.
It is the landing, the way that planes come in, especially from the south in Seattle, is pretty great because you're right. You get to sort of get awesome. The whole tour of the city up there.
You're looking down like a little kid. Cincinnati going into their stadium is awesome. I mostly do Western Conference teams, which is I appreciate. And I hope they do better. Austin. Their stadium's not downtown, but their stadium's spectacular. And they've built this area, like a second downtown called the Domain, where I remember when I went there first, it was empty and now it's all building up. And that soccer stadium is kind of the centerpiece of it. So, I mean, those are all, and I know Portland's pretty special too, where you could just walk.
I admit, I like going to games in Portland too.
That's a special building when you have the wood, the old original wood on the roof. That's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. I wouldn't ever admit that.
With Timber Jim and Timber Joey, like all that stuff is really good. We are in debt in this league to the Sounders, the Timbers, lesser degree the Whitecaps and the Earthquakes because of that history. It's not FC this or FC. It's that is so important and it's authentic. And thank you.
Well, that's a great note to end on, Max. Thank you so much for doing this. One other thing I'm told to bug you to get on Blue Sky, I guess. Especially after I just saw your tweet about how if you leave Twitter, you can't come back.
Well, it's like I have like 5 people and I have to read their tweet while they're leaving. I'm like, oh, okay. And then they're back. Don't lecture. If you're out, you're out.
Well, fair enough.
I guess what I'm saying, if you don't want to use Twitter, don't say anything. Just leave it.
I get it. I get it.
We all use it. It's a mess right now. There's a mess.
I kind of have to tell people this all the time. Like whether or not I personally love being on Twitter, as a journalist, it's still a very important tool for us.
Yes. And I will say, we can leave this, but when I go and I do a Sounders game, there's like 5 accounts, including yours, that I will click on and I will quickly educate myself.
There you go.
It's a great base when I'm preparing for a game. True story.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the calls that you've been doing. Where can people follow you though? Just you have a podcast as well.
Yes, I have a podcast, and the podcast has been dark for the last few weeks, but I'm bringing it back. But I also have, it's called the Soccer OG, but I also have been trying to focus more on the YouTube page, which is up there. So MLS and U.S. soccer national team. So I'll be watching the game, the U.S. games this week, and I usually will do videos about that. So I really enjoy that because I get to kind of be the editor at large with what we do. So
absolutely.
Check out the Soccer OG. It's under my name, Max Bretos, either on YouTube or check out one of the podcasts as well. Thank you for allowing me to mention that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It should be the first thing I said.
I know, right? I know. I should have teed you up. Well, Max, thanks again for doing this. Really appreciate it. Best of luck, and hopefully we'll talk to you again sooner than later. I am Jeremiah Shan. This is No Sadietes, and we'll catch you next time.
We love you. Let's win another one.